Why do some chairs have holes in their back? Seriously, look at one. You've probably sat on one thousands of times. At weddings, in classrooms, at restaurants, somebody's backyard, maybe even that one plastic chair in your house that has somehow survived longer than most relationships. But have you ever stopped and asked, why is there a hole? Because it turns out that little hole isn't just sitting there looking pretty. It is actually doing several jobs. And once you know what those jobs are, you are going to start noticing chair holes everywhere. Let's start with the obvious theory. Maybe the chair just wanted a window. No. Okay, fair enough. The real answer is a little more interesting. Because when designers make a chair, they're not just thinking, can somebody sit on this? They're thinking about everything that happens after somebody sits on it. How do you move it? How do you store 20 of them? What happens when it's sitting outside in the rain? What happens when your back is pressed against it for an hour? And how do you make the whole thing practical without turning it into a giant plastic tank? That's where the holes start making sense. First, try picking up a chair without touching the seat. Not exactly elegant. Now put your hand through that hole. Boom, instant handle. That hole gives your fingers somewhere to go. And when chairs are constantly being moved around, especially in schools, restaurants, event spaces, churches, meeting halls, and other places where lots of chairs have to be rearranged, that tiny opening becomes extremely useful. Commercial stack chairs are specifically designed for frequent handling and stacking. And some chair designs use openings in the back as lifting holes or handholds. So the next time somebody says, why do this chair have a hole? Congratulations, you found the chair's handle. But there is another important reason. Plastic isn't exactly famous for breathing. If you sit against a completely solid plastic surface in hot weather, your back can become its own little weather system. Perforated chair backs can allow more air to circulate around the person sitting on the chair. That's why manufacturers actually advertise perforated backs as a ventilation feature on some stack chairs. So that hole may be doing something very important, helping your back survive the afternoon. Now imagine the chair isn't inside. Imagine it's outside. Rain falls, water lands on the chair. And if a surface has openings designed for drainage, that water has somewhere to go. This is especially helpful for outdoor furniture, where drainage holes can prevent water from sitting around on the chair. Some outdoor chair designs explicitly use drainage openings to prevent water pooling, while chair manufacturers also list drainage as a feature on outdoor seating. Because apparently, even chairs has to deal with weather. Imagine being a chair, you've got no roof. But now we get to one of the really clever parts. Look at what happens when you have one chair, then 2, then 10, then 30. Suddenly, you are not designing a chair anymore. You are designing a chair storage system. Stacking is one of the biggest advantages of those kinds of chairs. Commercial stacking chairs are specifically built to stack higher and save storage space. And that little opening in the back can make the chair easier to grab and handle when you are stacking and unstacking them. Some explanations also point to airflow between 50 stacked chairs, although the exact function depends on the chair's geometry and design. So don't think every chair has one secret universal purpose. That's the important part. Different chairs are designed differently. One hole might mainly help with handling, another might be primarily about ventilation. Another design might combine several functions, and some are simply part of the chair's overall structure and appearance. And here is where everyday design gets really interesting. A chair back doesn't have to be a giant solid wall to support you. Think about a bridge. You don't necessarily make every part of the bridge a solid block of material. You use structure, ribs, curves, support, opening space. The goal is to put material where it actually helps the structure do its job. Chair designers use the same basic idea. A well-designed chair can use curves, edges, ribs, supports, and openings to create a structure that is strong enough for its job without simply making the entire thing a giant slab of plastic. And yes, a giant slab of plastic would be a terrible chair. It would also probably be the world's least comfortable throne. There is another thing manufacturers have to think about: material. Plastic chairs are produced at large scale, so even small changes to the amount of materials used in each chair can matter when you are producing huge quantities. But here's where we need to be careful. The hole isn't simply there because manufacturers wanted to save a few grams. The chair still has to be strong, stable, comfortable, manufacturable, and safe. So the opening is part of much bigger design trade-off. Use too much materials and you've made the chair heavier and potentially more expensive. Remove too much and congratulations, you've invented a chair that loses to a person. Not ideal. And this is probably the coolest thing about the whole design. The whole isn't necessarily doing one thing. That's what good everyday design often looks like. One tiny feature solving several problems at once. And that's why something as simple as a hole can actually be a sign of thoughtful engineering. Because when you look at the chair, you see a chair, but the designer sees a whole list of problems. How do I make it comfortable? How do I make it easier to move? How do I make it practical to store? How do I let water escape? How do I make the structure work? And how do I do all of that without making the chair ridiculously complicated? So put a hole in it. Sometimes engineering really is that satisfying. So the next time you're sitting on one of those plastic chairs, don't just see the hole. Look at what it's doing. Put your hands through it. Notice the airflow. Think about how easily the chair can be picked up and then look around because there is probably another chair nearby with the exact same little feature. And now you know that you're not looking at a random hole. You're looking at a tiny piece of problem solving. So why do some chairs have holes in their back? Because a good chair isn't just designed for sitting. It's designed for everything that happens before, during, and after you sit down. That little hole can help you carry it, let air move through, help water escape, and make the whole design more practical. And suddenly, it's not just a hole, it's engineering, which is a very fancy way of saying the chair has thought about this more than we have. If you want more everyday things explained before you spend another 20 years wondering why they're designed that way, you know where to be. Hit that subscribe button. See you in the next discovery.